million of uniformed people, but we have almost 300,000 civilians. So I'm an Army civilian, and I don't know if you. So I was enlisted when I was in the Army.
I was too. I work. What do you say? I tell people I used to work for a living.
Yeah, same thing. So I was enlisted. I was a non-commissioned officer, and I think part of the things that we don't realize when we are working for that living, right? So where the rubber meets the road, is that, while we come in, we see people wearing the uniform, and that's what we do on a daily basis. The Constitution requires civilian oversight of the Army, and so that's why the Army is led by a secretary of the Army appointed by the President of the United States. And within, so you have kind of this oversight body called a secretariat. And so that's where people like me fall in. I fall into the secretariat. And so, that's, I'm a career federal employee. I'm a senior executive. If you were to look at the emblem for the senior executive, it's a cornerstone. Yes. And so what we do is that we bridge the gap between the political appointees and the career force. So we keep that continuity within the federal government.
I want to thank everyone for listening to Bridges Live. I'm Dr. Paul Dyer. I'm talking with Anselm Beach. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary. There's a long name to this, but Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Equity and Inclusion of the United States Department of the Army. Wow. You have to be the longest title I've ever had to interview in my life, ever. And I've interviewed a lot of people over the years, and this is good stuff. So tell us about your job. It's not your job, it's your passion. You would have to be a passion to take on equity inclusion when it comes to the Department of the Army. The reason why is because being military people, we know how it ran inside, and you know how it runs on the outside, and the mirror is not the same. So what is it that you do when it comes to equity and inclusion?
Right. So in my role, I oversee several programs. They have to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. They have to do with equal employment opportunity. They have to do with military equal opportunity. They have to do also with how we adjudicate EEO complaints. And they have to do how we do policy development. And so I think, much like my title, that sounds like a very bureaucratic answer. So yes, I would give you, so I would tell you what we do. Paul, I'm thinking that you read a lot. And one of the things that, I normally refer to sometimes in my spare time is reading the classics. And so one of the classics for me is the Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we talk about equal opportunity and all those things, in this time, it almost feels like a Charles Dickens novel, right? It's the Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times and it was the worst of times. And it's the best of times because we are finally, as a nation, as an army, as a federal government, as the private sector, across the continuum, really spending some time to have these difficult conversations around uncomfortable subjects. And so that's good. It's the worst of times because we're spending a lot of time having these conversations. And sometimes what we're really doing is that the conversations amplify sometimes what it's not. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, on one spectrum, we could say it's about, advancing affirmative action. In another term, we could say it's woke. We could say a whole host of things. But I would tell you, as a former Army soldier to another, soldier for life, for the Army, diversity, equity, inclusion, what I do is that we help the Army to build cohesive teams in inclusive environments to fight and win the nation's wars. Because to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, or anything else that I do as some kind of experiment or something else is not to understand what we do in the Army. And it's not to understand what's happening in the marketplace right now. So for leaders who are listening to us, Paul, I think what they have to, our business owners or whomever, what we've got to understand in this 21st century is that diversity, equity, inclusion is really a framework to do several things: to optimize talents,
Yes.
to expand your marketplace, and to ensure that you have a better understanding of what that marketplace is, what is signaling, and how it's evolving over time. And so as the Army, we know that we are going to be competing for talent across the spectrum. People have choices in the 21st century. And so we've got to make sure that we are not only looking at how we target people for recruitment, but we have to do an internal scrub to ensure that we are creating an environment where people could come in and feel that sense of belonging and where they could apply the skills and talents. Other than that, they're going to go to someplace else.
We're not going to talk about the past because the past is the past, and we know there's difficult times that things have happened in the military, the Army, and even the civilian world that just got totally overlooked. And when you talk about having those hard conversations, that's important. Now, when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're never talking about social biases or social cultural biases, that people just don't know each other's culture, or so they don't know the person. How do you bridge that gap with which you are? Because you're in that role as between talking with the military, which is we have our SOPs, right? And then on the other side is they got to change those SOPs.
Absolutely. So Paul, one of the things that we are doing right now is that we know, as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, one of the things that we've got to do, as you so wonderfully put it, is as we help people to move beyond the past, is to ensure that we create new mental models and mindsets around diversity, equity, inclusion, and the value that it brings. From wearing the uniform and from going through basic combat training, is that, the person on your left and right may not necessarily look like you. But within the Army, you're going to depend on that person to watch your back every 24/7, right? So at a very primal level, we need each other to make sure that we are safe, right? And you talked about SOPs, and you're giving me flashbacks, and I think I got to recruit you and put a uniform back on you. But I mean, you're going to hear this for the first time. This is the first show that I'm talking to. There's a model that we're working on right now, and we're working across the Army. And what we are doing is helping leaders at all levels to have this new conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion. And what we are saying is that the Army's model of be, know, do, remember the whole leadership, be, know, do, that's a framework for inclusive leadership. And so instead of thinking through all these different social constructs that we put on people, we are saying that there are three things every leader needs to know. The first one is who your people are.
Yeah, who are
Every
they?
leader needs to know who your people are. And that is beyond your name, your rank, or your grade, or all those other things. What are your passions? What drives you? If you were to do a job and you want to get paid for it, what would that job be? That's the first question. The second question is, how do our people show up in the workplace? Right now, Paul, we are doing this remotely, right? Because we are in a pandemic. So when we ask about, how do your people show up? What we're asking about is, are they introverted? Are they extroverted? What is their affinity to work with technology? How are they faring right now in this virtual isolated space? What are their approaches to work? Are there fundamental aspects of their religion or their heritage that kind of informs their worldview? For me, I was born in the Caribbean. So I have a very kind of different worldview that was shaped based on my upbringing. I'll share a quick story with you before I get to the third question. When I joined the Army, my second duty station was in Germany. And my squad leader, I got there that Friday night. My squad leader came and he told me he was going to come get me that Sunday to meet the rest of the squad. They were going to be at his house and they're going to watch the football game. Okay. So I just came from the Caribbean. So what do you think I'm thinking about?
You're thinking of soccer. Right.
I'm thinking of soccer.
Yeah.
I get there and I meet everybody and everything is great until the football games begin. And I'm thinking, what in the world's going on here? Why they're not kicking the ball? Why they're wearing helmets and pads? And he looks at me and he sees this look on my face like I have, I'm in this state of cognitive dissonance. And so he says to me, "Oh, you don't know what's going on." He sits me down, educates me. And by the time I left there that night, I know what a 1st and 10 is. I know what a touchdown is. I want to know what a field goal is. Now, that squad leader was not a DEI expert.
Right.
He didn't ask me about race or any of those things, but he immediately included me in the team. So now I leave there thinking, I can't wait for next week when I'm going to meet these guys again, right, and we all going to sit around. And so that's, how do people show up? How would it, that's the other thing. The last question is, what do they have to offer? Mm-hmm. We have people who come into the workplace, and outside of the job they were hired for, they bring a multiplicity of skills and talents, and we never tap into it. Why? Because we have these old mental models around what inclusion is, how we optimize talents, and we've got to change that. And that's one of the things that we're working on in the Army right now. Now, people would hear that and they would say, okay, great. Every leader needs to know that. That's really good. But what they're really missing is that it's bidirectional.
That's
the
right.
leader needs to show that to the led, because the led wants to know, are you a human or are you a machine, right? And so those are the things that we've got to work through. And what we are actually doing is that we are not focusing, to your point, on, what are issues around race, gender, and all those other things. Are they subjects that we need to talk about? Absolutely.
Right.
But more importantly, we've got to get to build a relationship before we could get there. And so those are some of the things that we are focusing on. How do we focus on the care and feeding of our soldiers? And we could build that deep engagement strategy with them, because we're asking them to self-actualize and do great and wonderful things for our Army, for our nation. And ultimately, we ask them also at times to make the ultimate sacrifice. So how do we prepare that?
One of the things that I've been working on ever since I got out of the service, and I did 15 years, is that I started studying human culture, human behavior. Now, I always tell people I'm healing through PTSD, because you're always recovering. But one thing I realized, that through this model, you will have less PTSD because you understand who the person is. I love that. When you talk about who the person is, it's way beyond race. It's race beyond religion. It's race beyond color or how people identify themselves. But you talking to the person, and if you know the person, we have less struggles. And I think that's a great model.
Yeah, I think we forget, that there's an element of humanity that unlocks potential, and we get that when we know who we are. I was just out at Fort Leavenworth, and a great conversation with General Funk, who's the Commandant General of Training and Doctrine Command. And we were really talking just about the essence of this. When we talk about organizational culture in some instances are not so different than what the national culture is.
Right.
There's a symbiotic kind of relationship. And I think, as we all kind of think through what were our best times, in high school and junior high, in the Army, or, the great experiences, those experiences in a humanistic way was when we connected most with the people that we were working with. How do we kind of bottle that? And I think that is part of the discussion that's missing right now as we talk about these things in a national and meaningful way.
So I want to hear, I know you have solutions, but what is the pushback you're getting from command, or is it just from the public? Is there pushback between one or the other?
So, as somebody who's kind of wore the uniform, Paul, you know what we do in the Army, and you know that every leader out there wants to be a good leader, right? It's how do we provide them with the tools
to be good leaders,
to be good leaders, right? Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is nationally, we have to change the conversation, and even with colleges, universities, and anybody who's in the business of developing leaders, we've got to really, first of all, talk about the leading diverse teams, looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion as a 21st century leadership competency. The country is getting more and more multicultural, diverse. What you put a term on there. The other thing that we've got to think about is, you and I are talking for the first time through an interface of technology, and as our technology accelerates, we've got to think about what is the future of work look like. And as we think about because these are big questions that we have to answer. And when I talk to leaders, I tell them that all of the easy problems in the world are solved. The only remaining problems to solve are hard problems. And the reason why they're hard is because they're complex. And one of the contributing factors to that is because the world is so connected. So I'm getting to the long way to get to the second part of your question is, what are the pushbacks? And I think part of the pushback is really is kind of in the Army, but not really within the Army. It's in the public discourse when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, because so much of it is misunderstood. So much is kind of based on some of the political kind of
jargon.
Some of that, the divisiveness that we have in the nation. And, I think, I need to pause here and put a disclaimer and say, my opinions are not those of the Army, but of Anselm Beach, a person here, in this conversation with you. And I think we absolutely, those of us who are soldiers for life, Army civilians, we do this job because we love it. There's, if you've been around the Army, you've got to love soldiers. And I think there's a disconnect beyond people waving the flag and saying, we stand behind the Army and understanding the life of a soldier. Right? And I think those are the things that as a country, we've got to be able to have conversations and really understand that when we say diversity, equity, inclusion, we are not talking about taking something from somebody and giving to somebody else. We are not talking about, giving people promotions that they don't deserve. We are talking about how we create a framework that allows each person to be able to contribute to optimize their potential. Because, as we need every soldier and every civilian to be ready for the fight. The world is still a dangerous place.
It's coming. It's here.
And we've got to be ready for it. Right?
I actually think you put it to you succinctly. Is basically, most of you people don't know that. Thank you for listening to Bridges Live. You can catch all this where you catch all your podcast channels, where you pick up all your podcast news. Just Dr. Paul Bridges Live. I'm talking with Anselm Beach. So I want to put everyone through a PLDC program, right? That's exactly what you're talking about. Everyone needs to go get trained so they can learn how to learn, so they can learn how to be a leader. Because that's probably the one thing that the military does the best, is teach soldiers how to be leaders. And they really tune it to where it's a high level of access. Because not everyone can be leaders. And not everyone's going to pass the course. And not everyone's going to pass jump school. Not everyone's going to pass ranger school. Not everyone can be a certain type of leader. But we all can learn how to lead. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, Paul, what you're actually getting to is this notion of equity, right? Versus equality. Because on the other token, not everybody wants to go to jump school.
That's right.
And not everybody's job requires them to go to jump school. And not everybody's job requires them to be a ranger. And there's some people who may not want to be a ranger. And there may be some people who are actually looking at making their contributions in the academic space. Mm-hmm. So how are they good researchers for the Army? Are they good product developers for the Army? So it gets to this notion of the complexity of diversity, equity, inclusion, beyond that of the skin or the race or the gender, beyond those notional aspects of representation. And I think for us, as a nation, that's where we got to focus the next effort. How we move beyond this notion of representation to having people fully participating in our society, in our organizations, optimizing their talents, bringing to bear those skills and talents, and really created a new cohort of leaders who could optimize, what people bring, operate in multicultural spaces, understand in different religious settings, just navigating the complexity of people.
How can we educate the public? How can we service you? Because you're servicing us. How can we help all people develop this type of model so they can learn from?
Right. So I think one of the first things that all people need to really understand is that when we think about some of these is be better students, right? Be students of a constitution, be students be students of civility, and why that is important. We're thinking about we are in the third year of a pandemic.
Right.
And and there's a lot of thoughts around vaccinations and all those things, and what people's choices are. I'm not here to dictate, but I think what we've got to do is kind of get back to this bigger picture of if we believe that the Army is important and that soldiers we want to really thank soldiers for their service, then I think what we've got to do is also be models of gratitude ourselves. And so what does model of gratitude mean? It means we've got to understand that civility. It means that we've got to understand that when we as an Army, when we are working on these models to optimize our performance, that somehow don't sit on the side and say, well, look at the Army being woke, or here they are trying this social experiment. We are beyond social experiment. Again, soldiers on your left and your right back at basic training, they do not look like you. But you know what? We leave basic training, we get on the battlefield, and nobody messes with us because they know, it doesn't matter what you look like, what your gender is. If you're on my left or my right, you've got my six, right?
That's
you've got
right.
my on all sides. And I think that is part of the things that the nation really doesn't understand. That the full scope of a soldier is not like, hey, it's a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 job. And we have to ensure that people within the Army are ready at all times. And what does ready mean? Ready doesn't mean that you qualify with your weapons,
right,
and you're physically fit.
Right.
It also means that that mentally,
yep,
you're in a place where you feel safe, where the person on your left or your right is still going to look out for you no matter how you look, no matter what, right?
And I think that's why this model will curve PTSD in a whole. It will, because then people are able to open up emotionally. People are able to open up mentally. People can open up and saying, I don't feel ready. And we need to get you ready. How can we help you? And I think that's the model you're doing. Now, does every armed forces have this model? Does the Air Force, does the Marine, does the Navy?
So again, I'm Army. I collaborate with my colleagues. We are really maturing this right now. We are working with different leaders, and we actually wanted to, get it in Army doctrine so that we could make sure that there's a way. As you know, you talked about PLDC. It's now called BLC. Basically, it's basically the course. But I love the PLDC, Paul. I mean, I did mine when I was in Germany, 3rd Infantry Division. And a lot of people don't know that 3rd Rocket Marne was actually in Germany.
Yes.
So, So I think what we've got to be able to do is really figure out, how we codify that, professional military education, tier it, is it at PLDC or what we call BLC now? What does it look like in the basic office corps? And as you matriculate through the ranks, how we make sure that we are actually providing, information and education and training that's targeted to the level of responsibility that you have.
I sit on the Red Cross for Montgomery, Howard, and Frederick as a board member, and I'm chairing the diversity equity chair. How can we support each other in bringing that, or do you need anything that we can provide for you as far as like the Red Cross or any other civilian property?
Absolutely. So here's the thing, right? Remember, I started and I say it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. And I think what we've got to do is to continue to continue the conversation. we've got to continue to then look at how we initially begin the conversation, because we know that everybody is comfortable. There's a lot of sometimes a consternation between why is it that we have to talk about equity? Why is not equality? And we like equality because, it's part of the Constitution, right? It's part of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
It's part of the Bill of Rights.
Right.
But here's the thing. The thing is that, we've got to develop some new mental models, because equality is the start point. Equity is really the end state. Yep. And so equality really on the face just says that everybody gets the same thing. And, not everybody needs the same thing. If you, back in the day, and if you were a left-handed firer and you used the M16,
that's right,
you had to get a deflector on it, because the way that the weapon was designed, it would eject on the left side, because it was made for right-handed fires. Right. And if you were left-handed, you would get hit in the face with rounds.
That's right.
Now, you think about that. If everybody got the same thing, it means that if you had a buddy or a sister in arms who was left-handed, they couldn't really defend you, because the minute they fired a weapon, the own weapon could probably take them out if a round hit them in the eye. Right. So everybody cannot get the same thing. But what we've got to do is provide people with the tools that they need based on some individual construct. What is it that they need for success? And so that is part of the conversation that we have to have. So we come to this national kind of understanding of why these things are important and why they are not divisive.
The work you're doing is amazing. That's why I was so excited to have you on, and I would love to have you back on. I know you have a lot of time, don't have much time, but I want to hear about your stories about being in Wild Chicken and one of the coldest days you've ever been in Wild Chicken, or either that or Hohenfels, because that's one of the coldest days you could ever have.
So yeah, for the civilians out there, it's what Paul is talking about is a place called Wild Flecken, Germany. And, there's some other memorable places, right? There's Hohenfels and there's Grafenwehr. Yeah. And if you ever were to get Grafenwehr mud on you, you would never get it out of your uniform.
Never. Throw it away. It's time to get a new one.
Paul, I would simply say that, what the way that we would say in the Army is those are character building moments. Yeah. The days when you are so cold that you are just wishing for one moment of warmth. So it just takes you to places, and you appreciate small things like getting a warm room or sitting close to the potbelly stove.
That's right.
Once you get back to your tent. Paul, I can't thank you enough for the time being here today. I when people see soldiers and they say thank you for your service, I want you to go a step further and really not say just thank you for your service, but thank you for all the stuff that you kind of go through, and we want to make sure that we could support you into the future. So we are not going to second guess. We are not going to second guess you. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't ask hard questions about what we do as an Army, but I think we can't continue to be divisive and say, oh, look at this, why do we need women in the Army, or why do we need, you pick, a population group. And I would simply say is that we've got the greatest Army in the world because we've got the best people. That's right. We've got the most dedicated people. And it's not about the equipment that we have. It is about the people that we have. And so I still want the American people to know that we as an Army, we are still a trusted institution. We are working every day to be better. The more we know, the better we become. And so that is, what I would say.
Beautiful, beautiful Anselm Beach. Thank you for listening to everyone from Bridges Live with Dr. Paul Dyer. We'll be back on again with Mr. Anselm Beach, even though he has got a lot of work to do. If you want to learn more about what he's doing, where can they go? So
you could actually go to the U.S. Army website, look at the Equity and Inclusion Agency website. And that is where we track, our initiatives, our different programs. Paul, I would tell you that, this would be interesting to you because as a non-commissioned officer, there are times when I used to read regulations and say, man, who the heck wrote this thing? Paul, guess what? I'm now one of the people who are writing these regulations.
Oh no!
Yeah, I know. So one of the things that we did last year, we had a year of listening. So we are going across the Army, just listening to soldiers and civilians to make sure that we are getting it right when we write regulations, and we can understand those lived experiences. And as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we could show the nation in a meaningful way what we do in the Army, what we do best in the Army, and that is, build these cohesive teams in inclusive environments to fight and win, and how we develop leaders now and for the future, and how we are ensuring that soldiers are not just physically fit, but we are morally and ethically fit as well to meet the challenges of the future. Because the future, the world is a dangerous place. The wars that we fought in the past are not the wars that we are going to fight in the future.
It's not even going to be close. And I think a lot of the wars that we initially fight is the fight we have with ourselves. I think we fight an emotional war first. I think we fight a mental war first. And until we get past that, as a community, as a unity, we will never get past to the future wars. So as long as we stick together as a unified people, as understanding that there's equity and then there's equality, and we can build on those things. Thank you, Ms. Anselm. How you doing? And thank you for all the things you're doing. Thank you for the hard work you're doing. God bless you and your family.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.